No matter how good modern controllers get, they don't carry really much nostalgia for me. Or at least they didn't. Enter the Hunter controller from Retrofighters. If you played a lot of Xbox as a kid, I think you'll really like this controller. I don't know about you guys, but I played a ton of Halo growing up on the original Xbox, and I love the campaign. This is looking to be a great modern Xbox controller. That means if I was out and I wanted to play Halo on my ROG Ally, I could definitely do that with this controller. This would also let me have a little bit of more nostalgia with the controller itself. We even had those black and white buttons and the same color face buttons. But yeah, I've been really excited about this one. This also has a lot of features of modern controllers as well. We have 2.4 GHz wireless technology that we can use with the Xbox mode. And this also comes fully equipped with Hall Effect analog sticks and triggers. Hall Effect joysticks and triggers are something that I definitely look forward to in a modern controller. If I'm buying a controller and it's an expensive controller, I definitely want a Hall Effect. This one is priced pretty competitively, and we also get USB-C. I've been really excited about this, so let's open this up and see if this is the perfect rendition of a modern Xbox controller. The controller currently goes for $45 US on their website, and we have the two most nostalgic colors to Xbox. You can get the black one or the transparent green. Personally, I really like this transparent green. This reminds me a lot of the Xbox controller that I had as a kid. I think Retrofighters did a really good job at recreating the original Xbox controller. You can tell that a lot of people at Retrofighters had a lot of appreciation for the original Xbox, and it really shows in the design of this controller. Personally, I think this is a great looking controller, and I'm really excited to get using this. They also noted on the website this is only compatible with the original Xbox, not Xbox 360 or current Xbox systems. And you can only use this on the Nintendo Switch using the included USB dongle in docked mode only. This might be better anyways because this is going to give us the lowest latency. Full disclosure as well, this was sent over by Retrofighters, but they're not seeing this review beforehand, and of course all opinions are my own. I'm going to give you my honest thoughts to what I think about it. Let's open the box and take a closer look at the Hunter wireless gamepad. Retrofighters sends them over in these cool little boxes, and the packaging is pretty neat. They did also send me the transparent green one, and I'm excited for this one the most, but I think both look really good. So if you're a fan of the original Xbox, or you just appreciated the controller design, I think there's a lot to love about this controller. First things first, let's check out the black one, and then we'll check out the transparent green one too. Let's open the package and see what comes with the controller. In the box, we find another box. And in that box, we find another box. No, I'm just kidding. This comes with a small quick start guide. This little quick start guide shows us how to increase the rumble or decrease that if we want. And there's a few facts on there as well. It also lets us know that you can get about 10 hours of battery life before you need a recharge. That's pretty good. Let's set this aside for later. In the box, we find, of course, the controller itself, and that's wrapped really nice. Looks like we did have another box inside the box. In that box, we have the 2.4 GHz USB dongle. This is for use on the original Xbox. There's the USB-C port on the side, which we can use for connecting the controller or charging it. This actually feels pretty high quality too. Retrofighters definitely has good build quality. The only other thing in the box itself is of course another box. No, I'm just kidding. This is something I didn't expect to see, but we actually have a 2.4 GHz USB dongle. There's a little notification light on the front. We also have a removable cap, and this is pretty small too. I like how portable this is. This is actually very similar in size to the one from 8BitDo. Let's set that aside and take a look at the controller itself. And first impressions of the controller, this feels really high quality. I notice how nice these triggers feel. The buttons feel pretty high quality as well. The D-pad seems solid. And overall, yeah, I really like this. This is a pretty good first impression. Let's see how big this is compared to a few other controllers. Compared to the 8BitDo Ultimate Bluetooth, this looks pretty similar. The joysticks and D-pad are of course in the same position. We also have the start and select buttons in the same position as well. We also have the notification light in the same position, but the D-pad looks slightly different. Another thing that I'm noticing about the Retrofighters controller is it's also slightly wider than the 8BitDo Ultimate. I actually kind of prefer this. I do like the 8BitDo Ultimate Bluetooth, but I find this controller a tad small, so I do really appreciate the extra width in the grip. I did forget to mention it in the unboxing, but it does come with a USB cable as well. This is USB-A to USB-C. I'm starting to collect a lot of controllers, and a lot of these controllers are pretty different. They all do look very similar, and all the joysticks and everything else is in the same positions. Fundamentally though, every single one of these controllers here is different in their own way. Starting off on the smallest end possible, I think the 8BitDo Ultimate Bluetooth is definitely the most portable. This is not necessarily a good thing though, but it does feel quite high quality. I have had one of these die on me already, and the return process was pretty brutal. My current controller that I use more than most is actually the 8BitDo Ultimate Bluetooth, but one thing that I don't like about the controller, as mentioned, is the width. Next up is probably the X10 Mechanic Master. I've had the King Kong Pro 2 controller for quite a while, but I find I just don't use this controller anymore. I do like the joysticks on this controller, and the face buttons are pretty nice. All four of these controllers have Hall effect joysticks and Hall effect triggers. The face buttons on these controllers all look drastically different. The X10 Mechanic Master uses switches for their face buttons, which makes them very clicky. The King Kong Pro 2 has rubber membrane switches. The 8BitDo Ultimate Bluetooth has rubber membrane buttons, and the retrofighters also has rubber membrane buttons. If you're curious on the weight of these four controllers, I'll leave it up on the screen so you can take a closer look. I think the 8BitDo Ultimate Bluetooth is probably at the bottom of the list for ergonomics. This is a narrow controller, so your hands kind of bunch up in the center. It does have some nice texture on the back though, and it still is very comfortable to use. Next up is probably the X10 Mechanic Master. This one feels a little bit better to use as it's slightly wider and it has pretty comfy grips on the side. I do think that the King Kong Pro 2 controller also feels pretty comfy as well. It does have a rubbery texture to it though, and this generates a lot of fingerprints. Topping the list in terms of comfort is definitely the Hunter controller. My hands fit very naturally on this controller and it feels very comfortable to use. The grips are very smooth and it feels nice in your hand. Let's talk about the face buttons first on these controllers. The two controllers on the right use switches, but they're very different. The X10 uses dome switches and they're very clicky. The King Kong Pro 2 uses rubber membrane switches, if that's a thing. The 8BitDo Ultimate Bluetooth uses standard switches. These are very retro-like and they're kind of mushy. The retrofighters one has a little bit more pressure to push down, but these are also rubber membrane switches as well. The King Kong Pro 2 has 10.4mm face buttons. Coming in at 10mm on the dot is the X10 Mechanic Master, and I think this is the perfect size for the face buttons. The 8BitDo Ultimate Bluetooth is slightly smaller at 9.8mm, and with the smallest face buttons, the Hunter controller comes in at 9.6mm. I don't think this size is necessarily a bad thing, and they're still very comfortable to use. I'll show you what these face buttons sound like in a little bit. This D-pad is not using switches, so it's very retro-like. I actually like this D-pad a lot more than one that's switch-based. If you have a switch-based D-pad, those can get pretty loud when you're playing a lot of games that require them. It's pretty mushy, but I actually prefer that. You can actually push down the entire D-pad as well, which is kind of odd. I don't think I've ever seen that on a D-pad before. Usually D-pads have a pivot in the center, but this one does not. You can push down the entire D-pad. Compared to the X10 Mechanic Master, which is clicky and requires a lot of force to push down, I do prefer the Hunter. The King Kong Pro 2 has a very mushy D-pad, but it does have that pivot point in the center. If you look very closely, this one does have some flair as well, and that definitely adds to the overall comfort of using it. It's a really nice D-pad though. The D-pad on the 8BitDo Ultimate is very similar, but this one does require quite a lot of force to push down. And it also has a pivot point in the center. In terms of size, the D-pad on the X10 comes out to 22.8mm. The one on the King Kong Pro 2 controller comes out to 22.7mm. The D-pad on the 8BitDo Ultimate Bluetooth comes out to 23.6mm. And the D-pad on the Hunter comes out to 22.1mm. The trigger on the Hunter controller is definitely one of the best features, and these are some of the best triggers, if not the best triggers I've seen on a controller. They have a good amount of travel, they have a little bit of flair at the end, there's a little bit of texture on the trigger as well, and I think that really helps. But the thing I like about this trigger the most is definitely the force that you need to push it down. A lot of triggers are pretty mushy, and this one definitely is not one of those. If we look at the 8-bit Do Ultimate Bluetooth, this one has a lot more flare and a lot more travel, but they're also really mushy. I'm not pushing this down very hard because it definitely doesn't require that. I don't mind these triggers, but I definitely prefer the ones on the Hunter. I like the triggers on the King Kong Pro 2 controller, but now that I've tried some alternatives, I definitely don't prefer them. These feel very mushy and they're very easy to push down, and they also have too much flare. I do really like the silver accents though, but they're really smooth either way. In terms of trigger similarities, the one on the X10 is definitely the closest to the Hunter. This one has a similar amount of travel and a similar amount of flare on the end. The Hunter does require more pressure to push down. This is a lot easier to push, but these are both good triggers. I definitely like the triggers on this controller the best. If we look at the top of the controller, you're going to be able to see those triggers a lot better. The bumpers are pretty narrow. There's only a little bit of grip on them, but I actually don't mind that. These are excellent triggers, and I think you'll really like them. If we compare these triggers to the X10 Mechanic Master, there's some subtle differences. You're getting more surface area that has a grip on the X10, but I almost like it with just a little less like this. The X10 has more grip on the bumpers and the triggers, but with those mushier triggers, that might not be at everyone's taste. If you prefer a more solid trigger, definitely go for the Hunter. The King Kong Pro 2 though has absolutely no grips on their triggers and their bumpers. This is completely glossy, and the 8-bit Do Ultimate Bluetooth has a completely different design. These are in line with the triggers, and the bumpers are just buttons essentially. These are pretty mushy as well, and I've never been a fan of these. One area where this controller differs from the competition is in the joysticks themselves. These are hull based just like the others, but they feel very different. There's quite a lot of texture on the edges of the joysticks, which makes it easier to grip them. This is also a very rubbery texture, and that makes it very easy to use. And there's a slightly recessed top on them for your thumb. The 8-bit Do Ultimate Bluetooth has a similar design, but it's not as grippy. Your thumb is definitely going to feel that if you're trying to use this. I find my thumb slipping off these a lot more than on any other controller. These are still nice joysticks though, but I do prefer that grippiness on the Hunter controller. The King Kong Pro 2 also has concave caps, and they're rubbery compared to the ones that are on the 8-bit Do Ultimate Bluetooth. Again though, the most similar in design between all these controllers is to the X10 Mechanic Master. This is a very similar rubber cap, but you have a very different design on the sides of these. This is almost a tire tread design, as opposed to the standard texture that you would find on the Hunter controller or other controllers. I do really like these joysticks as well. Out of the four though, I definitely prefer the ones on the Hunter. This is a very good balance of everything that you're going to need on a joystick. Unfortunately, without anti-friction rings, these joysticks are going to wear away at the shell. This is definitely not as bad as I've seen on other controllers, and even after using this for a while, I'm not noticing much wear. This can easily be fixed as well using joystick protectors, and I'll link some good ones in the description below. I'm not too worried about this since it hasn't worn away quite yet, but that's definitely something to take note of. If I was using this constantly, I would definitely want to get some joystick protectors. Every other one of these controllers has anti-friction rings, and that makes them feel a lot more smooth. The only other controller that I mentioned today that doesn't have them is the 8-bit Do Ultimate Bluetooth. This controller, however, wears away so quick on these joysticks that if you do not put one of these anti-friction rings on it once you're gonna get it, you're gonna notice this thing worn away pretty dang quick. I've got some anti-friction rings on mine because I've been using it constantly, and these also make these feel very smooth. You can get a pack of quite a few of these for only a couple bucks. I also have to use these on my Steam Deck OLED and my ROG Ally. Every modern controller definitely needs some anti-friction rings. Regardless though, these are excellent joysticks and you're not going to get drift on them anytime soon. We can also measure the height on these joysticks relatively easy. The height on the joysticks on the Hunter controller comes to 9.6 millimeters. This is a good amount of height to them, and they're very comfortable to use because of this. The X10 Mechanic Master has less at 7.8 millimeters. The 8-bit Do Ultimate Bluetooth is on par at 7.8 millimeters. And lastly, the King Kong Pro 2 comes in at 8.7 millimeters. The caps are also slightly different on all these controllers. The ones on the Hunter come out to 17.3 millimeters. The ones on the X10 Mechanic Master come out to 16.6 millimeters. The ones on the 8BitDo Ultimate Bluetooth come out to 17.2 millimeters. And lastly, the King Kong Pro 2 controller comes out to 16.6 millimeters. Next up, let me show you what these buttons and everything else sounds like. I connected the USB dongle directly to the ROG Ally to get low latency, just to check it out. As soon as I turned on the controller, it instantly connected. I'm not sure if this is because I have two other 2.4 GHz connection dongles beside it, but I'm not getting the best circularity for Hall sensors. It looks like I'm getting about 3.4% on the right joystick and about 6.7% on the left. This is still not bad and way better than standard controllers. I couldn't think of any better game to test this with than the original Halo. I'm also going to try the green one, and I gotta admit though, this green one looks incredible. If I was to pick one of the two, this is the one I would choose. Once you plug it in though, it instantly connects. So let's give this a try. And of course we gotta do the original one that was on the first Xbox. If you're playing some of the original Xbox games and you're playing them with this controller, I think you're going to have a lot of fun. It's been many years since I've held an original Xbox controller, but from what I remember, this feels very similar. If you look really closely on the back, the grips on this make this feel really comfortable. This is pretty cool actually. It's been such a long time since I played the original Halo games, but I've recently replayed all of these on the ROG Ally. However, playing these with this original Xbox controller feels pretty cool. One thing I'm definitely noticing is this actually has very good rumble. I'm noticing most of the rumble is centered on the top part up here. I am definitely going to install some anti-friction rings on these joysticks as I want this to last a long time. I know a lot of people are going to be interested in knowing what kind of latency this controller has, so let's check out the latency next to see how it stacks up. I've also removed one of the 2.4 GHz USB dongles for my mouse to get the best results possible on this. Gamepadla is going to be testing the input latency. We'll just go with 4,000 samples for the test. So the test just finished and we've got some pretty interesting results. Even using the 2.4 GHz controller dongle that they've included with the controller itself, we're maxing at a polling rate of 125 Hz. This is giving us a stability of 46.53%. I think the reason that the stability might be so low is just because I'm using this with a dock. If I was to use this directly connected to the device itself, this might change a little bit. So to give this a fair test, well, let's just try this connected directly to the handheld itself. I've gone ahead and selected 4,000 samples and I started the test, so I'm just going to finish this and we'll see what the results look like. I've zoomed in a little bit so you can see the results of this test, and overall this is a lot better than what we had previously. We're still getting the 125 Hz polling rate, but what's interesting is now we have 85% stability. We're also getting pretty low jitter, and that's really good to see. But this is pretty average for most wireless controllers. So I want to see if I can overclock this on the 2.4 GHz just to see if we can get any better. Right now it's running at 125 Hz, but I'm curious to see if we can get this up to 500 Hz or maybe even 1000. I just overclocked it to 1000 Hz and I've restarted the computer, but as you can see, this is not registering the controller. This effectively means that this controller cannot do 1000 Hz over 2.4 GHz. We're going to have to lower the overclock down to 500 Hz to see if that works next. I tried dropping the overclock to 250 Hz, but it still defaults to 125. This effectively means this controller cannot overclock, which is still fine because 125 Hz is pretty standard for most controllers. The average latency is 9.23 milliseconds, which is pretty good. If this was connected wired, this would probably be a lot better, and we can give that a try. I'm going to be using this Thunderbolt 3 cable from a Vanke just to eliminate any cable bottlenecks. The bandwidth on this cable is phenomenal, so I know this won't be an issue if we use this cable. I just noticed something pretty interesting, but unfortunately this cannot be connected to PC with a USB cable. If you plan on using this with your computer, you are going to have to use that 2.4 GHz USB dongle. I think that's pretty okay though, because you can still use this 2.4 GHz USB dongle on the Switch as well. And these usually provide the lowest latency aside from wired. But with 125 Hz, this is pretty decent. And these are pretty solidly built USB dongles. So overall, what do I think about the Hunter controllers? Well, I think they're really nice controllers. Out of all the controllers that I've used, I do find these the most comfortable. They're light enough to not fatigue your hands, and they have really nice triggers. The joysticks are also really decent, but you do have to get some anti-friction rings to protect those. Even after the latency tests, there's still only a little bit that's been worn away. With those joystick protectors though, this shouldn't be an issue. I do really appreciate the Xbox nostalgia on the face buttons. I like how they've included the traditional white and black Xbox buttons, and it's fully compatible with the Xbox as well. These are probably the best triggers that I've seen on a controller. I do like how it requires a little bit more force to push down, but it's not too much. We also have a modern USB-C plug on the top, and we have some nice bumpers. The plastic also feels like it's built very solid, and I do really appreciate the controller texture on the back. Unfortunately, I don't have a real Xbox to test this with, but I might get one down the road. I think this is a great controller, and if you're nostalgic to the original Xbox, this is an easy purchase. I think this very dark and vibrant green looks fantastic. Overall, this is a really solid controller, and it's very easy to recommend, especially if you need something for the Xbox. I can't wait to check out more retrofighters controllers down the road, as I love what they've done. Modernizing all these retro controllers takes a lot of work, and I gotta hand it to retrofighters, they've done a great job. I do have some of the Dreamcast retrofighters wireless controllers, but they're not compatible with PC, and since a lot of the Dreamcast titles have been ported over, it's a shame that those can't work on Windows. If retrofighters manages to bring over a dongle like this for all those wireless controllers, maybe a universal wireless adapter, I think that'd be really cool. There's a lot of us that are very nostalgic to Sega controllers and other controllers, and we'd love to have that compatibility to play on our PCs. So what do you guys think about the retrofighters Hunter controller? Make sure to let me know in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future videos, and as always, thanks for watching.